In this last lesson of the term, we're going to just hit briefly on several major global issues that need to be considered and the future of our society in general. So we already talked briefly about environmental problems last time. Industrialization having been built on burning fossil fuels and destroying natural environments to build cities and create commercial products. Both of these lead to release of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases that block the sun's heat from escaping our atmosphere, leading to a gradual warming of the globe, and along with it, major climate changes. Now, this is coming from the way that we move ourselves and our stuff about, the way that we create energy to run our industries and our homes. It's also caused by our mass consumption of meat. We eat much more meat in industrial societies than most humans did in human history. And that livestock requires, one, destroying of a lot of habitat and forest, which normally absorb CO2. And the livestock also releases huge amounts of methane, which is a significant greenhouse gas as well. And we talked about the unequal nature of this damage, that people in industrial countries per person, in red here, are releasing huge amounts of greenhouse gases, while people in the developing world, producing less greenhouse gases per person, overall have just caught up with us. So what happens if the population keeps growing, if each person keeps using more energy, producing more waste, putting out more of these greenhouse gases? What happens if that increased population in the developing world wants to live the same lifestyle we do? Effects of climate change include the general warming, hence the name global warming, which can lead to wildfires, droughts, and desertification. But it can also lead to increased storms and other strange weather changes, including the potential for a European ice age if the Gulf Stream gets disrupted that brings warm water up from Central America to Europe. It also could mean melting ice caps, and we're already seeing that in progress. And since much of the world's water is held in the ice caps, that'll mean a rise in the overall sea level. This is a more dire prediction here of areas that are currently land that will eventually be underwater if the sea levels rise as much as we fear they will. It also could mean ocean acidification, since CO2 and other gases get absorbed into the waters, leading to a greater amount of acid which kills many sea creatures and could lead to potential drastic changes and potentially mass extinctions, including our own. There are other problems we need to worry about as well. Greenhouse gases aren't the only pollution that harms the environment we live in. We harm our water, air, and soil with putting out various toxins and with the waste that we throw away, because there is no way to throw garbage. It ends up somewhere, and much of it has ended up in the sea, including in giant garbage patches floating in various oceans, including one in the Pacific, which is estimated to be twice the size of Texas. It also means habitat loss as we cut down trees for our cities and for our industries and for our livestock. Could lead to desertification. These areas in yellow here are in danger of becoming desert, which are now livable land. And that all can lead to biodiversity loss, mass extinction. Biodiversity is the variety in an ecosystem that can make it healthy. Think of our ecosystem like an economy. It needs variety and competition so that when one species fails, another can take its place to support the complex system in which we live. It also can mean for us directly loss of new medicines, since many of our medicines are derived directly from nature and natural cures. It can mean a loss of healthy soil and a loss of the planet's ability to adapt to other changes. In terms of pollution, we have to think about water itself, a much more direct need, because a human being can only go a few days or a week without water. And of all the water on the earth, only a little bit of it is unsalted, about 3%, and most of that is frozen in the ice caps. But our industries create huge amounts of waste, and much of that, especially when that industry is unregulated, ends up in our rivers. We're trying to find new sources of oil because previous oil reserves are running out, and fracking is one way that we can get it harder to find oil in the earth. And yet doing so pollutes water and causes other problems. We also use far more water than the natural cycle of water has to provide. And so underground aquifers are getting lower, we're diverting rivers from places where they need to be. And increasingly, many freshwater sources are owned by corporations and are a source of profit. And that can mean harder access for people who need that water to survive on, to grow their crops with, and to drink. As we've talked about briefly before, wealthy countries can increase regulations on industry, recognizing that polluting our air and water harms us. But in a system of global capitalism, that means much of the dirtiest industries simply go to unregulated, poor countries. And the most harmful industries and practice and waste end up being pushed into the poorest areas. And poor people can't buy better land, can't move to better places. They can't buy imported food and water. And so we're looking at potentially a world of a huge number of environmental refugees seeking a place where they can survive. So what can we do about it? Well, there's things that you individually can do, but one person doing these things doesn't make a difference to the big picture. They require a collective effort. They require interest groups and achieving a critical mass of people doing these things. So how do you change larger society? That's where social movements come in. Organized group efforts to change some aspect of society. And they only begin when people start to see that there's a problem with something. But for a social movement to really take off, to really get somewhere, you have to see that there are potential solutions. And so the environmental movement has been on for several decades now. And much of it started with the publishing of a single book, Silent Spring, that pointed out the damage that some of the chemicals we were using for pesticides for our crops were doing to other aspects of the environment. And we saw Occupy Wall Street movement fighting against the inequality in this country and the money influence in politics. And we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement fighting for the rights of black people in this country. And yet both of these movements have struggled, and Occupy Wall Street has kind of faded away, although its ideas have gotten into the mainstream culture consciousness a bit more. And Black Lives Matter is trying to do that right now. They're protesting a lot. But neither group made any specific demands. They didn't present any specific solutions. They just talked about the problems. And so we have yet to see what, in the long haul, will be done about these problems. But social movements often result in counter-movements. We've talked about culture lag before, that not everyone changes and not everything changes at the same time. And so for each social movement, there is often a movement against that. So an anti-environmentalist movement and an anti-diversity and equality movement. But in terms of social solutions for these environmental problems, we can start getting more of our energy from renewable sources like solar, wind, geothermal from the very heat under our earth, and hydroelectric from our water sources. We can invest in better technology, cleaner production, technology that uses less energy to begin with, and maybe consumer products that last longer, so you don't have to be buying a new, quite damaging cell phone every year or two. Some of this can be done through government regulations, although they would require a global effort, a collaboration, a coalition between governments. We also have to think about the population as a whole, because the human population is increasing. But we can reduce that population, and we can do it with better access to healthcare, birth control, and also just better education. If we modernize countries, what we have often seen is that fertility rates go down. People have less babies when they have more opportunities.